So whenever a new game shows up and everyone's excited and they're having lots of fun and they just have found something that is really, really meaningful to them and something they want to keep playing for a long time, I'm sure they start to wonder whether the game's going to be successful. So for you guys, I think you're wondering that too. Is Supervive going to continue to be doing well? Is it going to be something that is going to be with us for a long time? That's a question that, I asked for a very long time when I've been playtesting for the last 2 years. I'm constantly asking myself, is the game going to succeed? Is it not going to succeed? Is this something I can stake my future on or not? Right? As a content creator, as an aspiring pro player. But over time, I realized something pretty important that made me feel pretty confident in it, right? Pretty confident in its basic capabilities, and is now, what I'm going to talk about today. So, jumping right into it, if we start off looking just at the core Steam numbers, they're looking really good. We started off at a 30k average, or 30k peak, and that climbed all the way up to 47k peak in like 5 or 6 days, which is kind of insane, and then has leveled off a little bit now that it's no longer the weekend, but is not leveling off so much that it looks like it's going down. So that's honestly super promising, and I think in terms of the raw numbers of the game, like we are cooking here, to be honest, guys. Like, I'm excited. So, just going off of that, things are going really good. It seems like the retention numbers are really high. Like, people are just really, really enjoying the game, which is just, that's what matters, right? Do people like the game? Great. Having said that, though, there's a lot more to this, because people can like a game and then all of a sudden realize they don't actually like it that much. So, will that sort of thing happen to Supervive? And the answer is that I will, tell you. So, Supervive in all games have two main ways that they can fail, essentially. The first one is that the game gets too stagnant, right? Or so the devs don't develop the game fast enough, or the core gameplay loop is inherently stagnant, right? So I'm going to use the example of Battleground. Battleground had an incredibly stagnant core gameplay loop because there was very limited variance in what the game was, and it's just constant repetitions of the same thing, right? So not necessarily the best for player retention, except for players that are really, really down to just constantly sit there and grind like micro mechanics and stuff like that, right? So that's issue number one, or if the game just doesn't get updated. The second one is changes to the feeling of the game. There is a certain feeling to every game, and that's what keeps people playing, right? They like the feelings that they're experiencing on each of their characters. Particularly in a hero-based game, that can become a serious problem when the feeling of the game changes for the players and the characters that they like playing. This was a serious issue in Overwatch, and this is actually what killed Overwatch, because the original feeling of the game was not able to be retained, right? The developers failed to understand the core concepts of the game, and the core concepts of the game, very, very deep levels, were holding together the very fine balance of letting all the different kinds of characters interact meaningfully with each other and in a way that felt playable and balanceable, right? While the game, on top of that, just had a very nuanced feel to it, because damage and healing were generally low, and so resource advantages were secured with good positioning and good aim and stuff like that, good ability usage. But Overwatch power crept itself because the developers were looking to create new and exciting characters, or they weren't sure how to change certain issues with the game, specifically how to counter the dive problem. And so they ended up basically just chunking the game full of healing, and then to counter the game being chunked full of healing, they're like, well, just raise the damage. And so they raised the damage, and then long story short, we got this game where things can't die. Things are like 1,000,000 HP, can't die, or they're completely dead. And that was entirely different from what the original Overwatch concept was, of this slow, methodical, I can blow you up, but with aiming for headshots and hitting good mechanical skills. But mainly I'm securing on a lot of characters like the tanks or some of the supports. I'm securing micro advantages over time with my positioning and my general gameplay that's gonna let me win the game, right? So that changed. Now, what does this have all to do with Supervive, right? Because obviously we are talking about Supervive. Supervive is essentially already power crept, right? Supervive is the same core game as Overwatch was, to be honest. It's, might sound kind of controversial, but it is a game in which it's a shooter. This doesn't, you know, might not feel like a shooter, but if you were to change the camera angle, you would recognize it's a shooter. The walls block projectiles for the most part, and you have, you know, you have to aim your shots, right? That's a shooter. You have to aim your shots, use the cover to block the shots, and you can't dash through the walls. You know, this is not really a MOBA. It just has a MOBA camera angle, right? And so there's a very deep like intricacy to how the characters can work and how you can produce all these characters with deep levels of nuance and all these different varied types with like, there's like essentially, long story short, there's like 9, there's like 3 core concepts, or what to say, like 3 core versions of each type of character you can have, in terms of like their nuance level, their like how, you know, are they super direct, or do they get value indirectly through another character, their like sets of capability, like how well they sustain themselves or others, their like rapid mobility, or, you know, their dashes, or their ranged capability, right? Those, and then hybrids of those, and then the last one is like what their core function is in the game, like support, tank, damage, right? All this stuff slapped on together is something that made a very nuanced game, right? But it's incredibly hard to balance, and that was Overwatch's problem. The devs didn't maintain that, and because of that, they made a game that was not properly, like, it didn't retain what it was, which was, you know, literally the flaw with the game. And that's why it's nowhere near what it once was, right? Because the game feel changed. Because people that wanted to play, like, you know, just Winston, Genji, Tracer, Mercy, Lucio kind of thing, and just have the same experience, they can never get it again, right? And it just isn't as good. Now, the thing about Supervive is Supervive's characters don't have that nuance at all. They are all built around tossing in some sort of CC on enemies, dashing away from enemies CC, putting a bunch of healing onto an ally, yeah, and like blowing people up. Like, that's what it is. It's very spiky, harsh gameplay, right? Which is, it's cool, right? It's not as nuanced as Overwatch was, and I genuinely think that it's a kind of flawed combat system. But nothing has to be perfect, right? If the game is fun, it doesn't need to be perfect. And so that's basically what we're working with here. Yes, it's not per se perfect, as like diverse as the game as it could be, and there's not as much skill expression in the combat as there quite could be and stuff like that, maybe. But the thing is, that's already how the game is, right? It's like all these characters in Supervive can do literally everything. They're all like, they have super high range, most of them. They have really high mobility, or they have really high they have really high sustain capability too, in terms of stuns and healing and stuff like that. And, you know, they have all that stuff, right? And yet they're still they're still like more than capable of being enjoyable to play, right? And so that's the core aspect of it, is despite the fact that they're like this, like they are like the characters that were designed that cause the problems of people to no longer enjoy Overwatch, because the power creep, the increase in capability, is what made the characters not fun, or what made the game not fun. And yet in this game, it still is fun, because there's other things in the game that allow you to bypass some of those issues, right? Specifically, you have the fact that it's a battle royale that changes it a lot, right? You have the fact that it's a like you have powers in the game. So if your character, like, you know, you just have like this extra variance in the game constantly that you can use to change and make it an enjoyable experience, despite the fact that it's you know, has these characters that aren't like super, that wouldn't be super exciting if they were to be like tossed in like an arena game, right, for example, or like an Overwatch style game. That, and then the Abyss creates this whole other aspect of gameplay with the gliding and all that kind of stuff that makes it worth it to play this game, you know. And there's just so much fun to be had in this game. But the thing is, the characters are not what's carrying the game. There's other things carrying the game. The battle royale, having this super dynamic, exciting adventure, the power system, letting you customize your builds and have all these ways to compensate for not having good matchups in certain ways and things like that. And then also, to some extent, the fact that, like, because like the characters are because of the way the characters are so spiky, like, you just toss your stuff on someone, people, and blow them up. And so it's a hero-based game, but it still just kind of feels kind of like you're playing like Call of Duty or something like that, in some ways. And so it's developed its own nice little niche, right? But the bottom line is that essentially, and this is why I'm excited about this, is that no matter what the devs do to the characters, like, they would have to low-key like butcher them. They would have to butcher them to make them not, so like they would have to change the feel of the game, right? And like I said, that's what kills a game. A game dies because people, like, what people enjoyed about the game, the feeling that they're experiencing, changes. It doesn't have to get, like, you know, worse or better, whatever. The point is that it changes. And if it changes into a direction that people don't like as much, which it probably will if people liked it in the first place, the game doesn't do well. Like I said, that's what happened with Overwatch. But since the characters are already so power crept and can do literally everything, and are already past this simple nuance of having all the variety of like a hero shooter type game and all this nonsense and all those different things, all the different systems going together and whatever and blah, 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 blah. If it's already past that and it's still fun, that just means the game can't change from that effectively, because there's nothing really that the devs can do. If they really can't make characters that are even more complex and do more stuff, right? Because you literally, like, there's only so much in reality in terms of these capabilities, right? And in terms of like, if they were to make characters on the opposite side that are like super simple or whatever, to like on the opposite counteraction of that, it really wouldn't like be possible essentially to have those characters be a problem, because they just wouldn't be as good as the other characters. So yeah, the devs might be adding characters that are just not as viable, but you just wouldn't play those ones, right? Or if you're playing them, you're like opting into an intentional like disadvantage, right? And in that case, like, since it wasn't, you started off having to be able to play these characters and have fun, but now you're just actively opting into just not having fun from the start, it's not quite the same, right? So long story short, I think Supervive is going to do really well. I'm not concerned about Supervive doing well and then dying. I think Supervive is going to do well and then just continue to do well. So yeah, guys, we're in for the long haul. This is exciting. Let's go. This is going to be good.